Friday evening, April 15th, 2022, is the appointed time to observe the Passover. As the Passover concludes, the appointed time for observing unleavened bread begins. These celebrations have their origin in the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt. In the days leading up to the Passover and the exodus from Egypt, God distinguished between His people and the Egyptians. As the plagues progressed in severity, God set apart the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived. Look at Exodus 8:22 and 23. And in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land. I will make a difference between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall be. The separation process that began at the beginning of this fourth plague is complete when God separates His people from Egypt, marked by the flight of the children of Israel from Egypt, which is symbolized by the consumption of unleavened bread. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is a special edition of The Voice of the Prophets. As the plagues against Egypt continue, each plague increased in severity, with the ninth plague, that of darkness, falling on Egypt for 3 days. Exodus 10:21 through 23. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the heavens, and there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone arise from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Now, did the light from the Egyptians' torches and the fires in their homes not give out light? Or did their torches and fires not stay lit? Now, whatever means God used to bring the darkness on the land, it was so heavy that it could be felt, and no one could see anyone else. The darkness was followed by the death of the firstborn of Egypt. This time, God differentiated by more than just exempting the children of Israel. In order to be treated separately from the Egyptians, the children of Israel had to act. God commanded them through Moses to sacrifice a lamb and paint the doorposts and the lintels of their homes with the blood from the lamb. This action placed an outward mark on the homes of the children of Israel who had obeyed God. Exodus 12:22 and 23. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintels and the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your house to strike you. The Passover sacrifice, as described by Moses, fits the description of a threshold covenant used to welcome guests into the home. H. Clay Trumbull describes a threshold covenant in his book called The Threshold Covenant. The common elements across cultures of this covenant are the sacrifice of an animal at the doorway by slitting the throat of the animal and allowing the blood to flow into the threshold basin designed for this purpose. The honored guest is invited to step over the blood, crossing over the threshold and into the home. And by this act, the guest becomes like a member of the family. If any harm comes to the guest, the threshold covenant has been broken. Conversely, if the guest harms any member of the household, the covenant is broken. The Passover sacrifice is an invitation to the Lord to pass over the door and enter the home. The presence of the Lord prevents the death angel from entering that home. Trumbull comments, "In that welcome with blood, there was a covenant protection from Jehovah as he came into Egypt to execute judgment on his enemies. The Egyptians had already refused him allegiance and put themselves in open defiance of his authority. They were now to be visited in judgment. But in order to the distinguishing of the Lord's people from his enemies, the Hebrews were to prepare a blood welcome at their doorway, and the Lord would honor this welcome by covenanting with those who proffered it. Now, obviously, the figure here is employed is of a sovereign accompanied by his executioner, a familiar figure in the ancient East. When he comes to a house marked by tokens of the welcoming covenant, the sovereign will covenant cross that threshold and enter the home of a guest or as a member of the family. But where no such preparation has been made for him, his executioner will enter on his mission of judgment. This threshold crossing makes a final distinction between those people who belong to God and those who don't. However, God did not leave his people in Egypt. He chose to bring them out from among the Egyptians and separating to make them stand out from the people around them. God's purpose was to make them into a holy set apart nation. Exodus 19, 5-6. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. After God executed judgment on Egypt and the gods of Egypt through the plagues and the death of the firstborn, the separation process continued. The children of Israel were to flee from Egypt with all their goods, livestock, and parting gifts given to them from the Egyptians who just wanted them gone. Exodus 12:33. And the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We shall all be dead." A side effect of leaving so quickly was that the bread they had started to make was not yet ready to bake. They bound it up in the kneading bowls and wrapped it in their clothes to easily carry it with them as they left Egypt. Now this was not an accident, but it was planned by God from the beginning. The unleavened bread was to be another sign distinguishing them from the Egyptians. Eating unleavened bread was to be a memorial of the day that they left Egypt. Exodus 12:14-15. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. They didn't actually eat the unleavened bread before they began their journey. They first prepared and ate the unleavened bread at their first stop, a city called Succoth. Exodus 12:37-39. Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. A mixed multitude went up with them also, and flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. The name Sukkoth is number 5523. It is the plural of Sukkah, number 5521, meaning hut, lair, booth, or cottage. It is a temporary structure used for shelter. As the children of Israel left Egypt, they stopped at a place where they found shelter or were provided with shelter and ate a meal which included unleavened bread. The first meal mentioned in the Bible that included unleavened bread was when Lot invited the two messengers of the Lord into his home. Look at Genesis 19, 1-3. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned in to him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Although the narrative does not mention Lot welcoming the angels with a sacrifice at his door, they did cross his threshold, implying a threshold covenant. Lot acted as though this covenant was in force when he protected the angels against the rioting mob who sought to harm them. The angels in turn protected Lot and his family against the judgment of the Lord. Lot's household was protected. Genesis 19, verse 15. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." Lot's family was protected through the night, like the children of Israel were protected through the night when judgment came on Egypt. Lot and his family fled in haste when morning came, just like the children of Israel left Egypt in haste. The parallels are striking. The Jewish sages link this event at Sodom along with other signifying or significant events in Israel's history with the time or season of Passover. Trumbull comments on this association. According to Jewish tradition, it was on a Passover night when Jehovah entered into a crossover covenant with Abraham on the boundary of his new possessions in Canaan. It was on a Passover night that Lot welcomed the angel visitors to his home in Sodom, and it was at a Passover season that the Israelites crossed the threshold of their new home in Canaan. When the walls of Jericho fell down, and the blood-colored thread on the house of Rahab was a symbol of the covenant of the Hebrew spies with her and her household. Other events which are associated with Passover include the protection of the Israelites against the Midianites and the Assyrians and the Medes and Persians, reinforcing that the Passover ritual was a threshold or crossover covenant. In these instances, the threshold was the border of the land. The unleavened bread eaten at Succoth and provided by Lot to the angels is eaten or prepared in haste. In each situation, the people had to leave their homes quickly. The children of Israel left Egypt quickly to avoid the outburst of Pharaoh's anger against God for the death of the firstborn. In Lot's case, his family had to leave quickly to escape the judgment that fell on Sodom. Eating matzah, or unleavened bread, is a testimony that God would preserve his people from judgment. He distinguishes between those who welcome him into their homes and those who reject him. Going back to Egypt, the matzah was first eaten as the children of Israel are leaving Egypt. The act of leaving Egypt distinguishes or separates them from the people of Egypt. They were to leave not only the nation of Egypt behind, but also the gods of Egypt. God executed judgment on the land and gods of Egypt. Exodus 12, verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. So eating matzah reminds us that we are to be separate from the world. It reminds us to leave the world behind and flee Egypt or Sodom. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, anyone who eats leaven will be cut off from the assembly or congregation of Israel. Exodus 12, verse 15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person will be cut off from Israel. This 7-day feast reminds the children of Israel that God brought them out of Egypt and separated them from the other nations. Exodus 13, 8 through 9. And you shall tell your sons in that day, saying, This is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be a sign to you on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. In Deuteronomy, Moses calls unleavened bread the bread of affliction. Deuteronomy 16, verse 3. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it, that is, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day in which you came out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. The word affliction is the Hebrew word oni, number 6040 in the Strong's Concordance, meaning depression or misery. This is the same word used when God saw the affliction of the children of Israel in Egypt and remembered his promise to Abraham. Exodus 3, 7 through 8. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow. And I am coming down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land to a good land, a large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to a place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now, eating unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread reminds the children of Israel that God saw their affliction and delivered them. David calls on God to remember him in the day of his affliction. Look at Psalms 119, 153 through 155. Consider my affliction and deliver me, for I do not forget your law. Plead my cause and redeem me. Revive me according to your word. Salvation is far from the wicked, for they do not seek your statutes. Unleavened bread is a part of all the interactions Israel has with God. Unleavened bread was offered up to God as part of the ordination of Aaron and his sons as priests. Any offering that included bread was unleavened. Look at Leviticus 2, verse 11. No grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall burn no leaven, nor any honey in any offering to the Lord made by fire. The unleavened bread was part of the body or set-apart food for the priests. Leviticus 10, verse 12. And Moses spoke to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons who were left. Take the grain offering that remains of the offerings made by fire to the Lord, and eat it without leaven beside the altar, for it is most holy. Celebrating Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread reminds us that we are separate from the world. The Passover is a celebration that we are in covenant with God and that we are protected from the judgment that is coming on the world. When we put the blood of Yeshua, our Messiah and Passover Lamb, on the doorposts of our hearts, we invite and welcome him into our lives. When we eat the unleavened bread, we rejoice that he saw our affliction and delivered us. It is a sign that we are separate and have been taken out of the world. We are to flee the world and the world's gods. We are to leave our sin behind. We are, in the words of Peter, a royal priesthood and a holy generation. So join us this week in celebrating the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I'm Dan Cathcart from Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.